Hi, thank you for joining me for the sixth session in our series, Introduction to Puberty Education. I'm Wendy Sellers, a registered nurse and a certified sexuality educator. I'm also the author of Puberty, the Wonder Years. In this video, we will identify ways to manage difficult student questions. Prevention is always easier. So how do you prevent getting difficult questions in the classroom? One key is to make sure the classroom teacher is in the room during all instruction. If you're invited into the classroom as a guest presenter, it's really important that the regular classroom teacher be there. If you are the regular classroom teacher and you're teaching puberty education, then you know how to manage behavior in your classroom. The second way to prevent misbehavior in the classroom and difficult questions is to adhere to the class rules, group guidelines, group norms, or group agreements, whatever you call them. And that would include the class rules that are set at the beginning of every school year and the additional guidelines for discussion that you established specifically for puberty class. Another thing to think about is, what is your philosophy related to difficult questions? I would suggest that we always communicate respect for students' curiosity, because that's the way they learn, and acceptance for their language. They don't have the language yet that we do as adults, and so when they use slang or other terms, our acceptance of that will create a calm atmosphere. Secondly, never assume a question is not a serious question. I've been in situations where teachers went through the question box and sorted out questions and said, that's a good question, that one's not. That's a good question, that one's not. I'm not going to answer that. That's a good question. Always assume that a student's questions are serious. If we treat students with respect and take them seriously and expect developmentally appropriate maturity, they will also treat us with respect. And so always take their questions, treat them with respect, and expect to get respect in return. So those are some philosophies for difficult questions. Here are 5 common types of difficult questions: embarrassing questions, personal questions, offensive questions, prejudice questions, and challenging questions. Let's take a closer look at each type. First, embarrassing questions. If you feel embarrassed at the question, just admit it. You can say, "Oh, I'm feeling a little embarrassed, but I'm gonna answer this question anyway." Because if you feel embarrassed, your students are probably going to be able to read that. And you know that students in grades 4, 5, and 6 are at an egocentric stage of life, and they may assume that your embarrassment is something they did wrong. So just own your embarrassment if you feel it, and then move forward. You're also modeling how to manage embarrassment, because your students will feel embarrassed from time to time also. Then take a deep breath, count to 10 if you need to, get composed, and then move forward with your answer. Personal questions. If a student asks you about yourself or asks a question about a person they know and names them, that's a personal question. So remind them of the group guidelines that say no personal questions, and then change the question into a third person question and answer it in the third person. For example, if they say, "Well, teacher, how old were you when you got your period?" Well, they don't really want to know how old you necessarily were. They want to know what's typical and are they normal and when can they expect that. So change it to the third person. Say something like this: "Well, asking me when I got my period is a personal question. And remember, our group guidelines say no personal questions, so I'm not going to answer that. However, I can tell you that many people get their period between the ages of 9 and 16. All right, so I changed it away from a personal question into a third person question and then answered it. Remember, kids often ask the question in the first person, "Do you?" when what they really mean is people in general. Third type of question, offensive questions. They may be offensive because they use a slang term or sound shocking, but it elicits a reaction in your body and in your mind. So if you're offended by a question, it will be important to take a deep breath, settle yourself, loosen your body language, make sure that you're not clenching or clutching or crossing your arms or frowning. So loosen your body language, take a deep breath, set your personal offense aside, because what offends one person doesn't offend everyone, but some things we do find offensive, and then answer the question factually once you have regained your calm. The fourth type of question is a prejudice question. Now, these may be offensive also, but if it's a prejudice that is in the question, such as a sexist, racist, homophobic, or transphobic word, term, or wording, then it goes beyond being offensive and it then crosses into being a prejudicial question. So don't ignore these questions. Do not ignore the words that were used. Words matter, and words will wound other students in the class if you don't manage this type of situation. So we want to make sure that any sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic wording or words are labeled as such and reframed in more respectful language. That is to protect all the students in the class, because we don't know who in the class identifies with that kind of aggression, microaggression, verbal aggression, and might be re-traumatized or re-victimized or in some way harmed. So name it as an ist, a bias, prejudicial question, a word, and then change the words, reframe it, and then go ahead and answer the question. The fifth type of question is a challenging question. Now, you might suspect that some of the questions your students ask are just trying to get a reaction from you. And that may or may not be true, but just don't react. So practice maintaining your calm and your cool. Practice deep breathing, practice an open body stance and a relaxed facial expression. And don't assume it's not a serious question, because it might be a very serious question, but you are just reacting to it and assuming that it is a challenging question when indeed it's a sincere question. So don't censor questions because of your own discomfort or disapproval of the question, because the student may be very sincere. So again, affirm the asking and maintain your calm, and then answer the question as if it is a serious question. When you can't answer the question in class, be sure to affirm all the questions, all the students who ask the questions regardless. Know your limits. Your personal discomfort, however, is not a limit. I know a lot of teachers do not answer some questions because of their own personal discomfort, not because of any boundary that their employer has placed upon them. So answer all the questions that you can in spite of your own discomfort. Don't let your discomfort be a limit. And then also encourage students to talk to their parents or trusted adults, their caregivers, if you can't answer their question. Give them a place to find an answer with another trusted adult, and know when to make a referral to a school nurse, school counselor, to get help if you suspect sexual abuse. I always like to remind teachers that students in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade are like mechanics. They just want to know how it works. So when you hear a question, you are hearing it through your adult filter, all of the experiences, beliefs, values that you have. Kids don't have those. They're just mechanics. And I think if we remember that they just want to know how it works and we take off that adult hat, we can answer them in simple kid terms. Remember, please, that your students will remember the music long after the words are forgotten. By that, I mean that the tone or the feeling of your answers will remain with your students long after the content of your answer is gone. So always be encouraging of students' questions, respectful of their questions, calm in the way you answer, so that that music is something that's a positive memory years from now. Now it's your turn to plan how you will apply this information. What new strategy for answering difficult student questions will you try?